Hello, it's been a while, hasn't it? Welcome back to the channel. I think you guys are probably wondering if this video took 9 months to make. No, but yes, this video didn't exactly take 9 months to edit, it's just because I procrastinate too much. Got myself to blame there. After each passing day went by, I eventually created a deadline that if this video wasn't out on the 26th of September, I would forfeit £100, so I started working after that. Also, if you haven't noticed already, there's a big change in audio. I just changed my audio interface and I think it sounds better. Comment below if there's a difference. Anyways, in this video, I want to talk about and introduce to you Hotel Dusk Room 215, a mystery adventure visual novel on the Nintendo DS. Released in 2007, Hotel Dusk Room 215 is an interesting title within the DS library. Developed by a Japanese company called Sing, a total of 8 games were made under the name before filing for bankruptcy in 2010. Sing made some good games during their run. To list a few: Another Code 2 Memories and its sequel Another Code R, A Journey into Lost Memories, Little King's Story, and of course, Hotel Dusk Room 215 and its sequel Last Window, The Secret of Cape West, which was the last game Sing released. Earlier, I said Hotel Dusk is a mystery adventure visual novel, and you may be asking, what is a visual novel? Well, in short, a visual novel is an interactive story within a game, where the core gameplay is reading text on screen, just like you would do if you were reading a book. It's quite a prevalent genre in Japan, and over the years, visual novels are getting more known, as they're being localized or developed outside of Japan. Visual novels like Clannad, the Fate series, and Doki Doki Literature Club are more of your traditional visual novels, whereas other visual novels like the Zero Escape series, the Ace Attorney series, and the Danganronpa series uses other gameplay elements to accompany the story. Hotel Dusk also falls into this category, but what separates Hotel Dusk to other visual novels are 2 unique features. The first being the rotoscoping art style, and the second being that you play this game by rotating your DS sideways. First, let's talk about the rotoscoping, which you may ask, what is rotoscoping? Rotoscoping is an animation technique that is used by tracing over footage of a person or object frame by frame, creating a realistic and fluid motion. There are many examples that use rotoscoping, ranging from films to music videos to video games. All of these use rotoscoping, but you can see how varied each one is despite using the same method. Now, there's a behind the scenes video explaining the rotoscoping process for the sequel of Hotel Dusk, and even though it's about the sequel, the process is the same for both games. I'll link the video in the description below so you could watch it in full afterwards, but I'll briefly explain the process here. In the video, we get introduced to Taisuke Kanasaki, the director and character animator for Hotel Dusk and its sequel. He'll be explaining their process for rotoscoping. The first step requires the scenario writers to create rough sketches of characters they want in the game, and after that they would screen candidates who look similar to the sketches. The chosen candidates are then brought to a studio for filming and are told of the character's personality and their role in the game. Once that's established, they are then instructed to do various gestures, like being shocked or listening for example, which are filmed and uploaded to a computer for review. They then take out the best movements / frames for rotoscoping. Onto the rotoscoping stage, and this is where the animated art style of Hotel Dusk and its sequel comes to fruition. Using a range of black and white, the art style of the 2 games consists of 3 layers. The first layer is the line art. In the video, they explain that they are not tracing the model exactly perfect, but instead uses rough lines and adding dynamic features to the image. The second layer makes use of oblique lines on top of the first layer, creating a 3D look to the character. The third and final layer is the shading, which are applied on clothing and shadows. The use of light and shade adds depth, and with all 3 layers combined, it creates a complete image. Let's not forget this is one frame of the animation, meaning that this process is done multiple times in order to complete one gesture. Once that's fully done, the image is then uploaded onto a DS for testing. In the video, they would use the protagonist sprite as reference to see if any adjustments are needed. This is then repeated until they're satisfied with the results, and that's pretty much how they did the rotoscoping for Hotel Dusk and Last Window. So now that you know a bit about rotoscoping, I think it's time to get right into the main part of the video. And don't worry, I haven't forgot about the sideways orientation, we'll get onto that once I show you some gameplay. But before we get right into it, I've got one thing to say. This video is sponsored by, just kidding, just kidding, I don't have a sponsor. What I was going to say is that since I intend this video to be short, I'm mainly going to talk about the first chapter of this game, and also I don't want to spoil the whole game in its entirety. Maybe another video in the future, but I want you guys to experience this game firsthand, and hopefully this video will pique your interest. Alright, no more postponing. It's finally time to show you guys Hotel Dusk, Room 215. As soon as you boot up the game, you'll be greeted by a prompt asking whether you're right or left-handed, which is a nice touch. And I think it's worth mentioning that Hotel Dusk was a part of Nintendo's Touch Generations, a brand that was created to promote specific DS and Wii games to appeal to the older demographic, mainly adults and the elderly, hence why the accessibility. Pick your preference, and then we move to the title screen of the game as we see Hotel Dusk scroll into view. Nothing much to say here, except I guess I should bring up that the following footage may be emulated, but unlike the last video, I do own the game. Both games, in fact. Also, the gap between both screens is intentional. I think I prefer it this way as opposed to the screens being next to each other, and it kinda looks like what you would actually see on a DS. With that out of the way, it's time to start the game, and I'm going to show you the intro in its entirety to set the scene. Hopefully that got you into the setting of this game, as we see our protagonist of the story introduce himself as Kyle Hyde. He explains what happened over the last 3 years, mentioning that he quit the force and left New York. Nowadays, he works as a door-to-door salesman for a company called Red Crown. But the thing about Red Crown is that the boss, Ed, who we saw earlier, has a little side business. And to quote Hyde, he finds things that don't always want to be found, if you know what I mean. Do you guys know what he means? Regardless, Hyde tends to lend a hand in his side business despite not being the best job around. He even says he's got nowhere to go and nothing better to do, so it seems like he's got no choice anyways. The most interesting part about this dialogue is that, near the end, Hyde mentions Bradley and that he's looking for him, which is a weird thing to say since we saw Hyde shoot Bradley in the intro. But I doubt that this will be the last time we hear of him. Moving along, we approach the entrance of Hotel Dusk, where the story and gameplay will begin. What lies behind these doors? What kind of trials and tribulations awaits us? Well, there's only one way to find out. Oh, hang on a sec, I'm in control. Sorry, I think I gotta tap the door here, and now we can go inside. So we start chapter 1 in the hotel's lobby, and it's not the most luxurious of places. Hyde points out there's no one around and proceeds to look for the front desk to check in. Fortunately, it doesn't take too long as the front desk is on our right with a big neon sign saying open above it. We also get introduced to question panels, and these are questions that Hyde has thought of which can be used later when there's a break between conversation. There are 3 types of question panels: white, yellow, and red. The white question panels are questions that require talking to more than one person, or questions that you don't know who to ask. The yellow question panels are questions that are satisfied by talking to one specific person. And lastly, the red question panels are questions that are necessary to solve a specific problem. These red question panels are introduced in the second chapter of the game, so we won't be seeing them in this video. Next, we move on to the exploration of the game. As you can see, one side of the screen shows Hyde's point of view, while the other side shows a top-down view of the area. We can control Hyde by touching a section of the screen to move him in that direction. And as we move close to the front desk, we can search it. When searching, we can point and click to examine objects, as well as change our perspective by moving this slider at the bottom. In front of us, there's a bell and a clipboard. Let's examine the bell, shall we? Don't worry guys, you didn't suffer an acid trip, that was just the game. Basically, what that transition means is that we have to solve a puzzle. I mean, this isn't much of a puzzle, but usually you have to interact something to proceed. The puzzles aren't too difficult throughout the game, but I believe some puzzles are there to showcase the DS capabilities. For example, there are 2 puzzles that require you to close your DS to solve it, which I think is pretty neat. Anyways, we ring the bell 3 times and the game congratulates us with a tune. Looks like someone's come out to greet us. Rosa! Hey Rosa! If I told you once, I told you 1,000 times. Don't go bothering me when I'm watching a game. Well, I didn't expect that kind of greeting. Now we get into the talking aspect of the game. Here we can learn new information, use our question panels, and at certain points when conversing, we can follow up by tapping this yellow button on the screen. Following up gives us 2 options to choose from. Sometimes it doesn't matter what you choose, but there are times where it does, and picking the wrong choice can lead to an instant game over, so be careful. We pick the bottom option and Hyde will ask who's Rosa, to which the man answers that she's the hotel's maid. A hard worker, but got a mouth on her that's the size of Nebraska, according to him. He apologizes for his mistake, and then introduces himself as Dunning Smith, the owner of Hotel Dusk. He then asks Hyde if he's here for a room, and Hyde confirms, requesting a cheap room for the night. Dunning tries to persuade Hyde to buy one of his suite rooms, giving us 2 options to accept or decline. It doesn't matter what you pick here, so we'll stand by Hyde's decision to buy a cheap room. We got one more thing to do before getting this room, as Dunning wants Hyde to fill out a registration card. He gives Hyde a pen and we go into another puzzle where we just have to tap the empty spaces to fill out our details. Once that's done, Dunning asks Hyde if he's actually called Carl Hyde. Hyde assures him that's his name and replies why. Well, it turns out Dunning had a guest who signed under Hyde's name, and this is where we get our first yellow question panel. We also get given our room key for the night, with the number 215 and the word wish engraved on it. Hyde asks about the wish engraving, with Dunning explaining that wish is the name of the room, and the thing about room 215 is that it can grant any wish. We then get given a brochure with a map of the hotel inside, as well as the times for when the bar and diner are open. And at this point, we can finally use our question panels. This part is a bit lengthy, so to sum it all up, the guest using Kyle Hyde's name checked in about 6 months ago. It was a blonde, tall and thin man according to Dunning, who Hyde suspects was Bradley. With room 215 granting wishes, Dunning tells a story where a guest who stayed overnight in room 215 claims that the room is actually magic and that their wish was granted. Hyde laughs in response, assuming that the story is just a fairy tale created by Dunning. Lastly, when asked about Ed's package, Dunning shows some concern, hoping that this package isn't going to cause any problems. When asked further, Dunning recalls an incident 3 years ago, where a guest had a package sent up to their room. It turns out the guest was a crook, using the hotel to fend stolen goods, and this caused quite a stir when some cops and detectives were involved. And to not repeat the same events, the hotel's got a strict policy: no crooks and no cops, wrapping up the conversation. But before we continue on, I think it's a good time to talk about the sideways orientation now that you've seen some gameplay. As you know, this game is played vertically. That means it's longer height-wise, which also means that there's a lot of room for the character's sprite. In conjunction with the rotoscoping, it does a great job at emphasizing the character's emotions. Imagine if this game was played horizontally. I don't think it would translate well, because usually in other DS visual novels, you would have one character on one side of the screen and another on the other, or you'll have multiple characters facing at you. If you compare that to Hotel Dusk, where Kyle Hyde is on one screen and the character he's talking to on the other, the space between the two screens gives that distance as if they were actually conversing with each other, which really makes it unique. Without these two features, I don't think Hotel Dusk would be as memorable as it is today. Let's get back to the game now, as the next thing we have to do is go to our room. We take a few steps and then it cuts to Hyde noticing a voice behind him. He looks back only to see an old lady asking for a room for the night. Dunning welcomes her and says what kind of room she's looking for. She replies back requesting a special certain room. The room she wants is the wishing room, but unfortunately we just took that room. Dunning explains the situation to her and asks if she wants a different room, which she accepts. This finishes up the conversation, and at this point we don't know the old lady's name till chapter 2, so I might as well introduce her now. Her name is Helen Parker, and the reason why she's at Hotel Dusk is because of a promise she made, and that's literally all I can say without spoiling too much. Back in control, and we still have to go to our rooms, so we go through the lobby and head towards the stairs. As we go up, our path is blocked by someone. Hey. What? You're blocking the stairs, kid. Move in. No. Well, wrap it up, guys. We can't proceed anymore. Time to end the video. So we start off with a follow-up. Hyde asks if something is wrong, which we then learn that she's just playing on the stairs. Hyde then asks for her name and where she came from, but she tells us she's not going to. We ask why, and she replies that's what her mum taught her, and to quote the next line, she said I should never tell strangers my name, especially jerks. Seems like her mother taught her well, and also taught her how to be a savage. The kid refuses to move out of the way, and so Hyde intimidates her by saying he's gonna tell on her to her mother, which brings out an interesting reaction from her. When further asked, we find out that her mother's not traveling with her for some reason. Hyde moves away from the topic and proceeds to ask why she's on the stairs in the first place. It turns out that she's just trying to finish this jigsaw puzzle, and that her dad said that she's too noisy in their room, hence why she's here. She plans to go back when the puzzle is finished, but she's having some difficulty. Hyde, being the gentleman he is, decides to help her, and you know what that means. As you can see here, we have the hardest puzzle yet so far. I mean, we've only been through 3, so that statement is correct. Once you solve the jigsaw puzzle, Hyde shows us a face of accomplishment. And you want to know what happens next? Since she didn't solve the puzzle herself, that's not fun to her, and because of that, she proceeds to throw the whole jigsaw puzzle down the stairs. His smile and optimism, gone. Adding more fuel to the fire, she tells Hyde, "You talk too much!" He then scolds her to pick up the pieces, and she reluctantly does so. After that, she tearfully apologized for her behavior, making Hyde feel a bit bad. He tries to reconcile, but it was all an act as she laughs at us and says, "I tricked you, stupid jerk," disappearing upstairs soon after. Hyde wonders who that kid was. At least we could go to our room now, but not before picking up a jigsaw piece that was left behind. The backside of the piece has some black lines on it, but that won't be relevant until a later chapter. We are finally on the second floor, and our room... We're never gonna get to our room, are we? So a young man appears from room 213, looking quite cautious. Hyde comes up to him and asks if he's okay. He notices Hyde and replies back saying that he's fine. Hyde then apologizes for bothering him and begins to leave, but he stops us, asking for our name. We introduce ourselves, and the young man then introduces himself as Jeff Angel. Hyde then asks Jeff if he stays here a lot. He responds by saying he's never stayed in a place like this before, and that he doesn't have much choice but to stay here tonight. We follow up, and Hyde questions why he doesn't have much choice, and Jeff suddenly becomes defensive, saying that he doesn't need to explain himself to Hyde. Hyde then assures Jeff he was just asking and that he's not a cop or anything like that. Jeff says that's an odd thing to blurt out, and that it's too bad Hyde's not a cop, giving us a question panel. We can now use our question panels once again, and the first question we ask is why it's too bad that Hyde's not a cop. Jeff says there's no reason, he just thinks that it would be cool to have a cop or detective in the hotel. We follow up and Hyde says, "What do you mean by cool?" Which Jeff explains that this hotel looks like a scene for a cheap TV crime drama, and wonders what if a real crime took place here and a real detective trying to solve it. He thinks that would be cool. Hyde replies that's an odd thing to think about, and Jeff assures him he's not a criminal or anything like that. Wait, that sounds familiar. The next and final question we ask is, who was that kid on the stairs? Jeff answers she's Melissa, who's staying in room 219 with her father, mentioning that the father isn't one of life's success stories. The conversation ends and we part ways with Jeff. Finally, without any interruptions, we can go to room 215 at the end of the hallway. The door is locked, of course, and so we use our room key entering the wish room. Stepping inside, Hyde recalls Dunning's story but quickly disregards it. He just wants to finish Ed's job and get the hell out of here. He places his suitcase on the table in the corner and suddenly the phone in the room rings. We pick up the phone and on the other end it's Rachel, Red Crown's secretary who we saw in the intro. She called Hyde because she's a bit worried since they last met a few days ago on Christmas Eve. She knows that Hyde's looking lost in his thoughts lately, and not to mention that there's been some rumors surrounding Hyde that he's an ex-cop on the take and decided to split town, or that he's a mystery man on the run from some shadowy organization. Hyde tells Rachel along the lines of "you shouldn't believe what they say," and she understands that Hyde's past doesn't have anything to do with her, but she just wants to know Hyde a bit more. Rachel then moves on asking if the package has arrived, which Hyde informs her it has not. She tells us that when we get the package, there will be an order sheet and a list of clients that we have to sell products to. The phone call then ends off with Rachel telling Hyde to call back to confirm the order sheet. Hyde puts down the phone and suddenly we get another call. This time it's Dunning. He just wants to tell Hyde that he has to pay his tab up front before dinner, but there's no need to rush. So we need to find some cash, and Hyde remembers putting some in his suitcase, so we go to the table where we left it, and we go into another puzzle. This puzzle we have to slide our key in. Got to wiggle it a bit, it's an old lock, and then the key snaps. Great. We gotta find another way to open the briefcase, but before that we hear a knock at our door. It sounds like someone's got our package. And would you believe that 10 minutes has passed after all we've been through at this point? Anyways, we open the door and we're greeted by the bellhop, who has their hands full with boxes. We take our package from the top and the bellhop suddenly says that they got a split. Hyde, feeling something amiss, tells the bellhop to wait a second, which panics him as he stutters and reveals that he knows Hyde. We follow up saying that the bellhop sounds familiar, but he denies every claim. Hyde takes it upon himself to yank the bellhop's chin to see his face, and it turns out the two know each other as Hyde recognized the bellhop as Lewis. Louis Donono is his full name, and the last time Hyde saw him was 3 years ago. Lewis is known for picking pockets in subways for a living back in Manhattan, and Hyde wonders what he is doing here in all places. It seems like the past 3 years, Lewis went straight, trying to live an honest life as well as landing a job here in Hotel Dusk. Hyde asks Lewis how does he know he'd be here. Lewis replies that he saw Hyde's name on the package, the same name that busted him back then. Seeing Hyde's name felt like a total drag, and Lewis just wanted to forget it. Another follow-up as Hyde asks if Lewis wanted to forget his name, and Lewis nonchalantly says, "You bet I did, man." He just wanted to forget all the crap that happened back then. He also mentions that when he first got this job, he would look at the guest list every day, always paranoid and afraid if someone he knew showed up. Fortunately, he never saw a name he recognized up till now. But that doesn't make sense, because if you recall, Dunning talked about a guest using Hyde's name. So surely he should have seen that, right? Lewis then asks Hyde what he's doing here in this hotel, as he assumes that Hyde's on a big job since he has come all the way here. Of course, Lewis doesn't know that Hyde quit the force, and so Hyde replies that the situation he's in is complicated. Eventually, we get to a point where Lewis tells Hyde that he's got a different vibe to him, moving along to our question panels. The first question we ask is about Lewis going straight. He said that he was tired of picking pockets and felt like he was too old to keep working the streets like a punk. We follow up with Hyde asking what happened, but he doesn't want to talk about it since he thinks that Hyde's still a cop. The next question we ask is the different vibe Lewis is getting from Hyde, and Lewis explains that the way Hyde's dressed and his appearance is not like him from when he last saw him. The Hyde back then looked sharp, wearing a black suit around the city, and Hyde remembers that's how it used to be, as he and Bradley ruled the streets in New York. The third question we ask is about the guest names. Hyde informs Lewis that his name popped up 6 months ago according to Dunning, but Lewis is certain that there was no guest using his name. Quite the mystery, I say. Lastly, we continue on what Lewis doesn't want to talk about. Hyde asks what happened, but Lewis doesn't want to get into the details, saying that he split the scene for his own reasons and that it doesn't involve Hyde. Lewis decides to take his leave, but before doing so, he wants to ask one last question to Hyde. He wants to know why Hyde changed jobs, and Hyde reveals to him that he hung his badge up, or more specifically, he didn't have a choice but to. Lewis in disbelief asks what happened, and Hyde recalls the events that happened 3 years ago in form of a flashback of the intro. He asks Lewis if he really wants to know, but he passes on it. Lewis says he's got to bail, but there's one last thing he wants to tell Hyde. Nobody in the hotel knows of Lewis's past, so he wants Hyde to promise him that he doesn't tell that to anyone. Hyde agrees to it and Lewis leaves the room. We can check our package now, so we examine it and it turns out there's no order sheet or products inside. Looks like Lewis mixed up the packages, and so we gotta tell the front desk about it. However, there is something in this package though, as Hyde picks up an old notebook titled The Secret Word on the front cover. We take it and head out, our next stop being the front desk. And as we're about to go downstairs, we get interrupted by someone coming out of room 219. It's Melissa again. We go up and talk to her and it appears that she has lost something really important, and because of that, she won't be able to see her mum. We follow up and Melissa elaborates that she made a promise with her dad that she has to do what her dad says with no backtalk. If not, she won't see her mum and they'll just go home. Using our question panel, Hyde asks Melissa what does she mean that she's gonna see her mum, and she replies that her mum's not at home. We follow up asking where did her mum go. Melissa says she doesn't know and explains that she was crying because she wanted to see her mum for Christmas, and apparently her dad said they could go and see her. Hyde asks where are they going, but Melissa doesn't know. That's quite the plan you got there. Melissa then asks where he's going, and Hyde tells her that he's on business, going where his boss tells him to. Upon hearing that, Melissa mentions that her dad also goes on business and has to do whatever his boss says. We get another question panel to use, and this time Hyde asks what her dad's job is, and Melissa replies that her dad's a surgeon, and her mum, who's called Grace, works in an art museum. We get to know a bit more about Melissa's mum, as she describes that her mum is nice, pretty, and bakes really good birthday cakes. She also adds that her mum would say nice things about her drawings since he used to draw pictures of her mum all the time. Hyde has an idea and tells Melissa to draw a picture of her mum in his notebook, and once that's done, he reminds himself to give back the jigsaw piece that Melissa dropped. But before that, here's the drawing that Melissa drew. I don't know whether that's an arm on the bottom left or a really large head on a small armless body, but it's definitely a drawing of someone. Anyways, we give the jigsaw piece back to Melissa and she gives her thanks, as she explains that the jigsaw piece was a present from her mother, hence why she considers it an important treasure to her. We're done with everything with Melissa now, and as we exit out, someone else comes out of room 219. It's her dad, and he's not happy as he orders Melissa to come back into the room. A brief encounter as the two return back into room 219. We regain control, so we head downstairs, and as we approach to the lobby, Hyde notices someone near the entrance. Hyde calls out to them, but there's no response, so we tap on them to get their attention. They turn around and we're met by a familiar face from the intro. Hyde says that he saw her on the side of the road, but she still doesn't reply. He wonders why she's not saying anything until he realizes that she might be deaf. Hyde tries to apologize but gets interrupted by someone behind him saying that she can hear just fine. We turn around to see another new face as she continues on saying that the person we're talking to hasn't said a thing since she arrived, and she too doesn't know why. Hyde immediately asks who she is, to which she replies that her name is Rosa, the maid and cook of this establishment. We're quite familiar with that name. If you recall, when we first met Dunning, he came out screaming because he thought Hyde was Rosa at the time. Eventually, Hyde asks who that girl is, and it turns out Rosa knows her name as she reveals that her name is Mila. This isn't the first time we've heard that name before, as we get a question panel indicating that Hyde knows something about Mila. The conversation ends there, and so we talk to Rosa one more time. She asks us who we are first, since she hasn't seen us around before. Hyde explains that he's a guest, and Rosa didn't realize it as she assumed that Hyde was one of those traveling salesmen. We follow up and Hyde asks why she thought he's a salesman, to which she replies that she knows the red crown jacket Hyde's wearing. Very observant of her. She follows up with a little rant saying that she bought a product from Red Crown and wasn't happy with it. She then asks for our name and Hyde introduces himself as we once again move on to our question panels. The first thing we do is inform Rosa about the mixed up packages. Rosa apologizes for the mistake and assures Hyde that Lewis will get that sorted. We then inquire about Mila and how does Rosa know her name. She points out a bracelet that Mila is wearing, and as Hyde further inspects it, it has the name Mila engraved on it. That makes sense, but what's more shocking is that Hyde reveals that that's the bracelet Bradley wore when he shot him 3 years ago. Rosa asks if something is wrong, but Hyde keeps it to himself. Hyde then wonders if Mila's going to stay here, and Rosa says she's gonna put her up for the night. Hyde tells Rosa to elaborate on what that means, and she explains that she's going to let Mila stay in her room tonight. Rosa also mentions that Mila managed her way to the hotel by hitchhiking. Apparently a young man who checked in earlier brought her here. Hyde asks who brought her in, and Rosa replies that it was Jeff Angel from room 213. We're familiar with him, and Rosa tells us that she's got a bad impression on him. I mean, it looks like he did just abandon Mila when they got in the hotel, so I don't blame her. The phone at the front desk suddenly rings and Rosa picks it up. It sounds like another guest got Hyde's package. Rosa puts the phone down and informs Hyde the situation that a guest is going to bring his package to his room. With everything sorted, Rosa tells Hyde to wait in his room while she attends to Mila. The two depart, and so we have to go back to our room. We go back upstairs and Hyde wants to talk to Jeff about Mila, so we take a little detour and knock on room 213. Jeff opens the door and we ask about Mila. He doesn't seem to recall a name like that, so Hyde mentions that she's the girl that he picked up to the hotel. We then use a question panel as Hyde asks if she ever told him her name, but it seems like Jeff isn't too sure. Hyde then asks why did he bring Mila to the hotel, and Jeff replies that she asked him to, says she had to go to Hotel Dusk. Wait, hang on a second. The person who doesn't talk asked? And Hyde basically says the same thing. Well, it turns out according to Jeff, she had a brochure of the hotel. Using one more question panel, Hyde asks if she knew the hotel, and Jeff explains that when he asked her where to go, she showed him the brochure. He also needed a place to stay, so it worked out for him. That's all there is to talk about as the conversation ends and Jeff returns back into his room. We try to go back to our room, but we get interrupted once again, as we see a stylish woman come out opposite of room 215. Hyde also introduces himself and asks if she needs something. Hyde says he is and asks who she is. She introduced herself as Iris, who is staying in room 216. Hyde also introduced himself and asks if she needs something. She says no, but she just wants to confirm a hunch she has. When asked further via question panel, she just wanted to confirm what kind of person Hyde is, because when she checked in, she demanded a room that had no one staying in the room next to her or across the hall. She then proceeds to ask Hyde about his occupation, and Hyde reveals that he's a traveling salesman. Iris is relieved to hear that because she explains to Hyde that he won't be trying to take any pictures of her. She then decides to take her leave, but Lewis suddenly shows up. Nothing much happens here but a bit of banter, as Iris returns to her room and we tell Lewis that he's an idiot for mixing up the packages. You can also knock on Iris's door one more time for a question panel, but I'll let you guys investigate that since it's optional. Finally, we go into our room, and as we take a few steps inside, we hear a knock at a door. We open the door and are greeted by a bearded man with glasses. He asks if we're Carl Hyde and if he's aware of the situation about the packages. Hyde says yes, as he presumes that this is the man who called the front desk. The man introduced himself as Martin Summer, who is lodging in room 211. Upon hearing that, Hyde thinks he's heard that name before. He then proceeds to ask where his package is, and Martin replies that he brought it with him, moving on to our question panels. Hyde mentions that he's heard the name Martin Summer before. Martin says he probably heard of him from a magazine or a newspaper, or it's possible that Hyde has read one of his books. We pursue further with Hyde asking if Martin's a writer. Martin replies he is, but prefers to be called an author. He mainly writes novels and other obscure mediums. Hyde asks what kind of novels, and Martin says mystery novels. He adds that you can find his works in most bookstores, and also mentions that he has a large female fan base. Martin asks if Hyde has read one of his books, but we say no. Now we get to the main reason why Martin is here, the mixed packages. We give Martin the old notebook, and whatever the contents of this notebook have seems to engross Martin, as he exclaims that this is what he was waiting for. We take our package and interrupt Martin's attention. He tells us that he's glad that the situation got resolved and then leaves the room. Now we can check our package. Inside, there is a client list, an order sheet, a portable sewing machine, and an adhesive remover. The order sheet has two things we have to get: a small red box and a December issue of a magazine with Cecily Lee on the cover. Anyways, we promised Rachel to call her when we got the goods, so we ring her up. Hyde questions who's the client that ordered these two items. Rachel replies that it must be someone new since it was done in a hurry. Hyde plans to start from the front desk and search through the hotel if needs be. He then asks if Ed is around, but Rachel says that he stepped out with an old client. Hyde tells Rachel that he'll call back, but before we go, Rachel has one more thing to say. She tells Hyde to forget about wanting to know him better. Hyde says don't worry about it, but he'll tell Rachel one thing: anybody else pestered him about this, he would shoot him. How nice of Hyde giving Rachel a pass. The call ends and Hyde begins an inner monologue about Ed. Ed used to be an ex-LA cop who worked like a dog until he was forced to retire. Hyde's father passed away when he was 10, but were good friends with Ed. It seems like Hyde and Ed are very close since only Ed knows that Hyde is still searching for Bradley. Now things are getting interesting in Hotel Dusk. We met Lewis, someone we haven't seen since the incident, and Mila, who has Bradley's bracelet. The search for Bradley may be closer than we think. Hyde then wants to gather everything that has happened thoroughly, and so we move on to a quiz-like section. This section of the game happens at the end of every chapter. Hyde will ask questions that are related to said chapter, and we have to answer them. Unless you have really bad memory, answering these questions are easy and doesn't really pose any challenge. At least the music is pretty good. Once we answer all of the questions, Hyde will close out the chapter. He says there might be something big here in Hotel Dusk that might lead to Bradley. Well, whatever it is, it's going to be a long night ahead of us. And that's it for chapter 1. Without spoiling too much, the whole story takes place in Hotel Dusk, and it all happens in one night. We met all the characters this game has to offer, albeit there'll be some other names dropped here and there. Every character has a reason being here in Hotel Dusk, and throughout the game you'll find out connections between each character, complementing the writing of the game. Overall, Hotel Dusk presents a well-written mystery story set in the 70s. It's a great addition in the Nintendo DS library, despite being a bit unknown from other DS games. It has a charming cast of characters, and I haven't mentioned it till now, but the music in this game is a perfect fit, very atmospheric. If you haven't realized it yet, the music you've heard throughout this video is the music in-game. Honestly, the whole soundtrack itself is definitely worth checking out. However, let's not forget this is a visual novel, and that might not be everyone's cup of tea. Not everyone likes to read a bunch of text for a couple of hours. So, the most important factor you want in a visual novel is to be engaging and that the story needs to be enticing, which Hotel Dusk delivers on. Nevertheless, if you are interested and have a DS, I recommend finding a copy of this game. But if you can't, there are alternatives like looking up a playthrough or emulation, for example. I may make another video for the rest of the game in a very condensed format. I probably could have done things differently to make this one short, but I'm still new to this and slowly learning. This won't be the last time we see Kyle Hyde though. As I mentioned before, there is a sequel, Last Window, The Secret of Cape West, the final chapter of Hyde Saga, but I'll cover that another day. Anyways, time to wrap up this video. For the next video, I think I've got a good idea in mind, and that will hopefully add more content to this channel on top of these longer style type of videos. I guess it's a good time to plug stuff, so I have a Let's Play VOD channel, Jev the Ninja Plays, which you can check out on YouTube. You can also check my Twitch through there as well. I'm also on Twitter, @Jev the Ninja, if you want to see my tweets, I guess, about games or updates on the channel if you want an alternative. And as always, like every other channel, if you want to support and want more, like, subscribe, and all that jazz. And I'll see you guys next time and catch you guys later. Take care.